My name's Dr. Sandeep Gupta. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about just like a bit of a basic program that anyone can start off on to improve their general nutrition and lifestyle. I'd like to say to start with that this is not really intended as medical advice. Really, it's nutrition and dietary advice for people to just lay a platform for further healing. So we're not intending to replace the advice of a medical practitioner or a specialist if that's the sort of advice that you need at this moment. So what do I mean by giving you a basic program? Really what I mean is that there's some basic fundamentals you can put into place to actually give yourself a foundation for healing whatever situation you're in. That diet is very, very fundamental. Diet is one of the most fundamental things you can do. So we tend to say in our clinic, if you can't get your diet right, then all the other things you do, whether it be supplements or medications, they're never really going to work properly because you don't have a proper foundation to stand on. So what are the fundamentals of getting your diet right? Well, one of the biggest things that we tell people is that start off by having whole foods, whole natural foods. And what we mean by that is avoiding anything that comes packaged and avoiding anything that's got ingredients that you can't pronounce or that don't come from nature. And this may sound like common sense, but really it's not common practice anymore. So rather than going to get the majority of our foods from the local supermarket in packets, we're recommending go to a farmer's market. Go get your foods unpackaged, unprocessed, and in the form of fresh fruits and vegetables. And if possible, we definitely recommend buying organic. And why do we recommend organic? The reason is that pesticides and herbicides, as Dr. Cousins points out in his book, are basically neurotoxins, and they have an effect on the neurological or the mind system. And according to various studies, they have been shown, organic foods have definitely been shown to have a higher nutrient value. And so really what we want to do is go back to food in its natural state, and organic is definitely a step closer to that. Another step closer to that is if you can get your food from a local farmer. Basically what you're doing is taking a step closer to the actual source of the food. So when you go and buy packaged foods from a supermarket, you're actually very many steps away from the original source of that food. While when you're actually going and buying local produce from a local farmer themselves, you're actually one step away from the actual production of that food, because that farmer has gone and actually planted that food and raised it up and is selling it to you. And that's very important. That's actually a very underrated concept in health, is that the closer you can get to the actual source of the food, the more you are actually energetically connected to that food. So really what we're talking about is whole foods, unprocessed foods, and as far as possible, raw foods. So what we mean by raw foods is foods that haven't been heated above around 50 degrees. That doesn't mean that you have to eat your food cold. It can certainly be heated up to just being a warm sort of temperature, but not above 50 degrees. There are also a lot of different dishes you can create that are very delicious, and you can use a dehydrator to actually create a lot of the textures that otherwise cooked foods would have. So really what we're saying is focus your diet around vegetables, particularly the green vegetables and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, and then whole nuts and seeds. And then there's other foods like what we call algae, blue-green algae, and grasses like wheatgrass and barley grass. One of the keys to these foods is they are nutrient dense. And Dr. Joel Fuhrman, in his book, Eat to Live Diet, he produced a table which really documented the nutrient density of different foods. And what he found was the majority of foods are actually very low in nutrient density. What that means is that they give you a lot of calories, but they don't actually have a high amount of actual nutrients. And when I say actual nutrients, really what I'm talking about is phytonutrients, like things like resveratrol and lycopene and carotene. And really what we want is to maximize the amount of actual nutrients. I'm also talking about minerals and things like vitamin C. the more you process a food, the less actual nutrients you have in it. And generally speaking, what Dr. Fuhrman found is that the highest nutrient-dense foods were the green vegetables like kale and collard greens and bok choy and broccoli and those sorts of foods. So the more you can emphasize those in your diet, the more you're going to be able to assimilate these phytonutrients and minerals, which most of us and most of the population are very, very deficient in. Linus Pauling was quoted as saying in the 1930s that you can trace every illness back to a mineral deficiency. So one of the big keys is getting foods that are high in minerals. A lot of studies now have shown that the more you eat of organic fruit and vegetables, the less your risk of cancer and other chronic degenerative diseases is going to be. And that one of the big reasons is phytonutrients. And that includes the whole spectrum of things like carotenoids and resveratrol and lycopene. And there are so many other phytonutrients that I'm not going to mention. So that's just a very little overview on diet.